I want to tell you about the most turbulent time in my life. There was a 3-month period where my world crumbled. The woman I was going to marry moved to Europe to pursue higher education. My father passed away from a sudden illness, and the imports company I worked for got uprooted and moved southwest to Cairo. I had no choice but to take what little life I had and follow the company. I signed up with an agency to help me find a place to stay. I had to get something fast or risk losing my job. It wasn't all bad though. By staying with the company when almost half the staff left, I had an increased seniority. I was reassigned to help with foreign contracts and overseeing customs agreements, meaning a lot of late-night phone calls and video conferences with people in distant countries. I was busy keeping my head above water. I tried to sleep as little as possible, as my heart hurt whenever things got too quiet. I devoted myself to my work, hoping my intrusive thoughts would quiet down over time, because if they didn't, well, that was hell on earth. I was lucky. There was an opening for an apartment on short notice. The rent was surprisingly cheap, and it was a nice neighborhood. There was a notice about there being an adjoining shop downstairs, but that it had limited opening hours, and the rent was cheaper to compensate. I looked over the floor plan and couldn't find anything to complain about. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a storage closet. It was all I needed. No one seemed to have anything bad to say about the owner either. Now I could have signed up for a look at the apartment before I signed the lease, but I was afraid that I might lose my spot in the queue. It was a very attractive deal, both location-wise and rent-wise. To find a place like that on such short notice is almost unheard of. The agency I'd used was equally surprised. "This never happens," one of them told me over the phone. "At the end of the day, it's up to you, but I can promise you that lightning won't strike twice." So yeah, I took it. The apartment building didn't really stand out. It was 3 floors tall with a smooth red exterior, white arched windows next to shaded balconies facing away from the sun, a little shop on the corner, and a set of ornate glass double doors leading to an entryway. There had been a couple of abandoned building sites on the way there, but this building was situated at the edge of a residential area, overlooking a pristine field of grass. It was beautiful. There was a bronze plaque hanging above the door. It was old by the looks of it. "I bring you respite in the house of rest." That was a name I'd heard in passing. The building had an address, like everything else, but the locals seemed to refer to it as the House of Rest. I liked the sound of it. The entry was lined with beautiful handcrafted hexagon ceramic tiles. The floor must have been cleaned recently. I could almost see my reflection in it. There was a smooth breeze blowing through the hallway, and it's as if all the hustle and bustle of the city stopped at the closing of the doors. It was quiet, so refreshingly quiet. The agency had given me a key to the mailbox, which is where I got the keys to the apartment. I was up on the 3rd floor. There was no elevator, but I figured I could do with some exercise. Good for the legs. There was a total of 16 apartments in the House of Rest. 6 on the bottom floor, 6 on the middle floor, and 4 on the top. The top apartments were a bit smaller, but were rumored to have the best view. The mailbox already had a piece of paper sticking out, an advertisement for a local restaurant. I could see the same blue-tinted paper sticking out of all the other mailboxes as well. I brought it along, figuring I might as well check it out someday after work. I didn't know anyone in town, but that wasn't going to stop me from celebrating a little. I opened the mailbox, got my keys, and went up to my apartment. I didn't see anyone when I went up there, but I could hear them. People laughing, someone playing the piano, a jingle from a radio playing in a distant room. It was lively, but not intrusive. I quite enjoyed it, made me feel a bit less alone. Going up to the 3C apartment, I was a bit hesitant. I figured maybe it was all too good to be true. Maybe this was where the scam revealed itself. But no, I was wrong. It was wonderful. Bright open spaces with a view of the grassy field on one side and the bustling street on the other. An old-fashioned kitchen, much like the one I grew up in. The apartment was clean, well kept, and there was a perfect corner space for my at-home office. I couldn't have asked for a better space. I could breathe a sigh of relief. Things were finally going my way. It took me a couple of days to get things up and running. I got some new furniture and carpets. I explored the neighborhood and tried the restaurant from the flyer. They had an amazing hawashi. Heaven. I could get most of my necessities from the corner shop. They were only open for a few hours every day, but the prices were low and there was a discount for residents. The same old man tended the store every day. He must have been in his 70s, but he always had a smile on his face and was so used to handling money that he could hand out exact change without looking at the bills. All in all, it was shaping up to be a great place to live. It really encompassed its namesake, the house of rest. My mother was very traditional and I was raised with certain practices. Now, I'm from a younger generation and a lot more flexible, but there are traditions and customs that I adhere to. For example, I attend a mosque for the Maghrib prayer and I take some time out of my week to leave for the Jumu'ah. I couldn't look my mother in the eye if I didn't, but it's also a comfort that I've grown accustomed to. It's a part of me. The first Jumu'ah I attended in that neighborhood surprised me. I saw no neighbors leave the house of rest to attend, so I first thought they might attend somewhere else. I asked one of the other attendants, but they weren't sure. They didn't know anyone who lived there except for the shopkeeper. People can have a lot of reasons not to attend, but that man had said something unusual, that he didn't know anyone who lived there. These were people from the neighborhood. How could no one know who lived there? Now, I was still settling into things. About 2 weeks passed, and I got into a comfortable routine. I had everything I needed, and no one bothered me. Sure, work was a hassle, but with the low rent I was paying, I could work less hours if I wanted to, and still make it through the month with a bit to save. As the company was restructuring and hiring new people, I got some unexpected time off. This could have been a blessing, but it really wasn't. I had to stop myself from looking up what was going on in the life of the woman I'd lost. There were images and video of her laughing, making friends, learning a new language. It was devastating, not only because I missed her, but because it made me question my choices. I lay awake at night wondering if I should have dropped everything and gone with her. But instead of dwelling on it, I tried to make the best of what I had. And in that space of thought, my mind kept wandering back to the curious fact of my neighbors. How come no one knew them? And why had I never seen them? I would hear them sometimes. I could hear them talking, laughing, cooking. They were there, behind the closed doors. But they were there, I was sure of it. I could hear individual conversations if I listened closely, but I didn't want to be rude. At night, walking around outside, I could see light shining from their windows. I could hear them walking around if I listened at their doors. But I couldn't find any names or phone numbers. Their mailboxes just had written addresses. There was no way to tell who lived where. But coming home from the shop on the corner, I noticed something curious. I'd lived at the house of rest for 4 weeks by then, and walking past the mailboxes, I noticed something blue sticking out. The same flyer for the restaurant that I'd received on that very first day was still there in every mailbox but mine. No one had gone outside to check their mail for weeks. This caused me some concern. I decided to go down to the corner shop to ask the shopkeeper. I figured he'd worked there for years, maybe decades. He must have seen someone at some point. I waited until a couple of kids scurried out and then I walked up to him. A small TV kept running in the corner, but he didn't pay any attention to it. His eyes were all on me, with an inviting smile. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you know any people in this building?" He looked at me with that same smile but said nothing. "Excuse me," I repeated. "Do you know them? Anyone?" He laughed a little and offered me a cigarette. I took it. "You don't speak?" I asked. "Little," he said, "very little." He had this raspy old voice, and he pointed to his throat. I didn't press him about it, and instead went outside with him to enjoy my smoke. This man's beard was as ashen as his cigarette, but it fit him somehow. We just stood there for a moment in silence, watching the busy street. People rushing by like the blood of a vein. There was something organic to it, and just stepping back for a moment calmed my nerves. I don't think it was the cigarette, it was the perspective. "Yafu," the old man said. "To be." "Yafu," I repeated. "You know him?" The old man nodded, giving me a tap on the shoulder. As he went back inside, he looked back at me a final time. "Good man." Now, I didn't want to just barge in on Yafu, but I figured I'd keep an eye out. I'd never set foot on the second floor, I had no reason to. But I couldn't help being curious about what kind of people my neighbors were. There had to be a reason why so many of them never left. Maybe there was another reason the rent was so cheap. Another week passed. I was getting into a routine where I rarely had to leave home. Apart from going out to pray, I pretty much never left my apartment. The corner shop had gotten some of my favorite food brands, so most food and drink that I wanted could be bought right downstairs. It really became my haven. Going outside and getting bombarded by the sounds of the city grew increasingly frustrating. I still had to leave for in-office work a couple of times per month, and when I did, I longed to get back home. One time, after returning from a long day, I saw a man leaving the house of rest. He was about my age, but wore surprisingly old-fashioned clothes. I walked up to him, trying to get his attention. He turned to me with a calm demeanor, his hands open. "Are you Yafu?" I asked. "Yes, that's me," he said. "The old man at the corner told me you live here," I said. "I just moved in, so we're neighbors." "A neighbor," he smiled. "What a blessing. Come, dinner's on me." There was no way to say no. I could tell he wouldn't accept it. And besides, this was the first neighbor I'd spoken to. I had to know more. Yafu told me he'd lived in the house of rest with his wife Rashida for years. He was originally a repairman, but he'd sold his business for a hefty profit and was technically in between jobs, but there was no hurry. "With rents this cheap, I can live off that sale for years," he said. "I only do some extra work on the side when I want to get Rashida something special." "What about the others who live there?" I asked. "Do you know any other neighbors?" "No," he said, matter-of-factly. "We all keep to ourselves. It's our piece of heaven. No need to bother it." "It really is a house of rest," I said. "It really is. We're very blessed." Before we went our separate ways, there was one question I'd forgotten to ask. So before we said goodbye, I turned to him. "I have to ask," I said, "what were you doing today?" He turned to me with a cheeky smile. "I must confess I have a vice," he said. "I get a bottle of red wine for my wife, and I get a pack of smokes. The good brand, not the cheap stuff from the store. It's my one indulgence, I swear." "So that's it? A bottle and some cigarettes?" "Don't underestimate the little things," he said. "They are the best and the worst things in life." There wasn't much to say about that. He had a bottle he'd brought along, a fancy brand that he'd gotten from downtown. As Yafu turned to leave, he looked back a final time and waved. "If you smoke indoors, sit at the open window," he said. "You can't smoke inside, but they don't check the open windows." As he wandered off, I assumed he was talking about the owners, but that was another thing. I'd never met them either. But what did he mean by them checking the windows? Who did? When? In the late hours of the night, when I was working at my office desk, I would think about that. What did Yafu mean? Was it just a friendly reminder to keep the apartment in good shape? Or was it something more literal? I couldn't tell. Were the owners that strict? I tried to go and talk to him a couple of times, but he never opened the door. I figured he was busy or out doing something. But without a clear answer, my mind was left wandering. So in a sudden lapse of judgment, I decided to challenge this thought head-on. So one night, I stood by my closed window and lit a cigarette. Now, I can't say for sure what I was expecting. I don't think I was expecting anything at all, really. Maybe someone would ask me to put it out. But no, nothing happened. I was a bit disappointed, really. But as I turned to flick the ash off, I noticed something. The soothing breeze turning to an icy sting. The flavored smoke in my mouth turning sour. There was this warmth on my shoulder, as if someone was looking at my neck. I could feel my heart skip a beat, as if something was judging me from afar, like I was about to get scolded, like a frightened child. I stepped away from the window, hastily putting away the rest of my cigarettes. Imagination or not, I couldn't explain that sense of unease, as if breaking the rules wasn't just something frowned upon, but a fundamental wrong. Then footsteps. It was loud and fast, coming down the hall. The other tenants had been sleeping for hours, and yet they somehow seemed even more quiet. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I didn't dare to move. Something in the door cracked as a great weight pushed against it, making the hinges creak. I took a few steps forward, waving my hands as if to clear the air. "I'm sorry," I called out. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again. I'm throwing them out. I'm sorry." The creaking stopped. I just stood there, watching, waiting for the footsteps to continue. Then the hinges creaked again, as the weight pushed off the door and someone retreated into the building. I couldn't unlearn this. There was someone in that apartment building watching me. While the house of rest was an amazing place to live, I couldn't stay with that kind of pressure hanging over my head. I reached out to the agency about getting a new place, but they warned me it could be a matter of months. So for now, I had to keep my head down and hope for the best. After that night, I would notice little details around the building. For example, there were drag marks on the tiles of the top floor by the stairs leading to the roof, as if someone had pulled something heavy. The locks on the mailboxes were all a bit frayed, which didn't make sense to me. There were still these blue papers sticking out of them. If someone checked these mailboxes so frequently that the lock was getting janky, why didn't they remove the flyers? And finally, there was the basement. It's not uncommon to lock the basement of an apartment building to keep nosy tenants from messing with things they shouldn't. But there was a drainage slit in the floor, as if ready to clean up large amounts of liquid with a spray hose. So while my life continued, it did so with a tinge of doubt. I was anxious. I still kept to my schedule of working at night and attending prayer, but I wasn't feeling that same sense of calm anymore. I was anxious about going home. I didn't know what to expect. I decided that I ought to try talking to my neighbors again, for real this time. I needed answers, and if I couldn't get them, I would leave that place come hell or high water. So after Jumu'ah, I went home with the intent to go door to door. So I did, floor by floor. I could hear them, different voices doing different things, talking, eating, listening to music. But as soon as I knocked, they went quiet. No one came to open, not even Yafiu. I wanted to go back to my place and close my eyes to the whole thing, but I couldn't. I couldn't pretend like there was nothing going on. So I checked the floors, again, for something drastic. I found it on the top floor of the building. A fire alarm. I pulled it. I had to get people out of those apartments, and I had to know what was going on. I was a bad neighbor, but if this continued, I wouldn't be a neighbor at all. But the alarm did nothing. It was disconnected. So while this building was in pretty good shape, it was old-fashioned. It had a sort of grimy PA system in place, with speakers lining the hallways. Looking around on the bottom floor, I found a white side door leading to a supply closet with the PA system controls. I couldn't help but notice how well used the cleaning supplies were. There was even a garden hose for spraying away liquid of some kind. I turned on the PA system and heard it crackle to life. It was old, but functional, if barely. I had to click the button a couple of times to get it to work, and as a first test, it only picked up every third syllable or so. My voice barely carried through the old wires, coming out as a distorted, crackling mess, but after a couple of seconds of adjusting and holding the cable at just the right angle, it worked. "Please exit the premise," I said. "You need to leave your apartment. This is a temporary measure." I didn't recognize my voice, and it carried so slow that I could hear myself on the floors above. This had to do the trick. If this didn't work, nothing would. I hurried up to the second floor. Every door was closed and it was quieter than usual. Then one by one, the doors would open, Doors clicked and swung open, tentatively. Careful eyes looked outside, scanning the premise for answers. There was Yafu, of course. Next to him, his wife Rashida. But there were others too. Beautiful young couples, some with children. Each and every one of them a picture-perfect couple or family, and all of them as healthy and well cared for as you could hope for. They started walking out into the hallway. I could hear the same happening on the floor above. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Is there a problem?" "Do we need to leave?" another asked. "He said we shouldn't leave." "I don't want to leave," someone added. "Please don't make me, please." The PA system crackled again as it rose to life. Everyone looked up. "Return to homes," it growled and spattered. "Go back, inside." I couldn't tell if the distortion was from the voice of the speaker or the struggling electronics, but people weren't sticking around to get an answer. A heartbeat later, they threw themselves back into their apartments. The final face I saw was Yafu, apologetically closing and locking his front door. I hurried up the stairs, rushing towards my apartment. Something was moving downstairs. I could hear footsteps rushing at full speed, hot on my trail. I didn't look back. I just hurried back to my apartment, grabbed my keys, and slipped. The keys sailed across the hallway, landing somewhere in the harsh shadows of a sharp overhead light, and someone joined me in the hallway. The old man from the shop. His back was straighter and he looked taller. I just looked at him, not knowing what to expect. Then he spoke. It was the same raspy old voice as I'd heard down in the shop, but there was something else to it. It wasn't just a tired old voice. It was something deeper. It wasn't just a sick man. It was something inhuman, struggling to find speech in something not designed to talk. And as his eyes reflected in the dark like a cat on the hunt, he spoke again.
"You!"
I rushed forward, grabbing my keys. He ran towards me, not just a brisk jog, but a full-on sprint. I could never have anticipated how fast he was. I fumbled with the keys as they stuck to my sweaty palms, and I barely got back inside before he got to me. I closed the door, but didn't get a chance to lock it. Before my fingers could reach, the door burst wide open, leaning off its hinges. The old man was tall enough for his head to reach the ceiling. But it wasn't a normal height. It was something unnatural about his proportions. As his neck extended, his head brushed against the ceiling and bent backwards at a breakneck angle, as his limbs grew elongated and boneless. His head leaned backwards as if looking backwards, but the body never turned away from me. His arms, now longer than my entire body, pushed me across the room, breaking my kitchen table as I bruised my tailbone.
"You defy sanctuary. You defy rest."
With a single arm, it pulled the oven out of the wall and grabbed the live wire connecting to it. Without skipping a beat, it pulled on the wire, ripping it straight out of the wall while still connected. It sparkled and popped in protest as he moved closer.
"You were hurting. You were ready."
It stabbed the wire past me and into my workspace, bursting my computer wide open with a violent bang. It was so hot that one of the windows cracked.
"This will not fall into ruin. It is no house of flies."
With its free arm, it grabbed my shirt, pulling me up to my feet. I was choking on my own spit as I looked into a shapeless, flesh-like void. As the old man's skin came apart, all that was left underneath was a strangely textured dark, like a walking night.
"This will not corrupt,"
it growled, pulling me closer.
"It is no house of lies."
With the last bit of air in my lungs, I wheezed out what words I could. It's a house of rest," I whispered. "Sanctuary home."
"Home."
It repeated. It poked a long finger into my chest, and I felt my breath turn cold.
"Where heart is."
Something ached in me. Something terrible and deep, like my nerves turning upside down. It forced my eyes back into my skull, as if I was trying to look at my own spine. As I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, it was gone. Thundering footsteps disappeared down the hall, leaving me with a pounding bruise on my chest. I tore my shirt open and looked for bleeding. There was a massive bruise that reminded me of a sunflower, right over my chest with a thumbprint in the middle. By morning, that bruise would have turned a sickly blue. Minutes later, I got back on my feet. I stumbled into the hall and down the stairs. I almost tripped on my own feet. But by the time I got to the bottom floor, that bruise was burning me. And with every step I took closer to that front door, it burned even more. I could feel my pulse skipping a beat and changing pace. There was a twist in my stomach as my lungs contracted, spilling out a mouthful of blood on the pristine floor. I could challenge it and press further, but I would die, so I didn't. Turning to go back upstairs, I'd see the old man staring at me from the basement door, observing me, not saying a word, just clutching a garden hose to clean up the blood from his precious floor. The next morning, the old man came to my apartment. He fixed the walls, the door, everything. He brought along some groceries and a brand new work laptop, the same kind they used at the office. I have no idea where he got it from or how he knew where to get one. He had the oven hooked up by dinner time. I noticed how he never once reacted to hearing the adhan, the call to prayer. He didn't even look at me twice when I brought out my prayer mat. He just kept working. I didn't know what to do. I could ask someone for help, but I was afraid of what would happen if I left. There was something inside me that didn't want me to leave, and I'd never heard of anything like it before. But then again, even if I left, where would I go? What would I do? I could see why everyone stayed inside. It was easy. The old man would come up with groceries, and he would get you anything you asked for. A new computer, a phone, fresh fruit, anything you might need to keep yourself calm and controlled. So for about a week I stayed in the house of rest. I didn't leave for the Maghrib as I used to. I didn't leave for Jumu'ah. I didn't have any hawashi at the restaurant down the street. I stayed inside, praying for guidance. It was the most gilded cage you can imagine. It was so simple to let yourself be trapped. All you had to do was accept that this was as good as it would get. But I couldn't accept it. I just couldn't. That place may have been perfect, but I wasn't. Every day I would roam the halls. I'd walk up and down, looking for answers. And every time those footsteps came back, I'd hurry back inside like nothing had happened. I wouldn't tempt fate, and I wouldn't attempt to leave. I would play by the rules. Which made me think of Yafiu. I managed to catch him leaving his apartment once. He looked displeased to see me as he leaned back against his front door. "You made him mad," he said. "Bad idea." "But you can leave," I said. "How can you do that?" "He lets me," he said. "It's only a small indulgence. A little wine, a pack of smokes. There's a trust. I've never had the urge to escape, so he doesn't care." "And you're accepting this?" I scoffed. "You want this, Yafiu?" "I have everything I need." He smiled. "I'm sheltered. I'm in love. My belly is full. This is the answer to my prayers. Isn't it yours too?" I thought about it. In many ways, yes. If I stopped working altogether, the old man would still let me stay. I was sure of it. I'd still have food on my table. Hell, I'd probably have shows to stream on my laptop. And judging by the other people who lived there, he would keep me happy and healthy for as long as he could. Maybe he could even keep me young, like the others, as time passed. But there were things he couldn't heal, and there were things I didn't want to surrender. Not yet. "I can't stay," I admitted. "I will die." Yafiu looked me up and down. There was something resolute in his expression, and understanding. Perhaps in the way we were different, could he see my pain. He walked up to me, handing me one of the fancy cigarettes from his pack. "Then remember what I said when you smoke," Yafiu whispered. "Open the window. He doesn't check an open window." "I'm not interested in—" "No, my friend, listen," he repeated. "He doesn't check the open window." That night, I opened the window and lit my cigarette. I took in the bustling sounds of the city and leaned out. It was a long drop from the 3rd floor. My heart was pounding, but not like it had when I tried to leave on the 1st floor. Yafiu was a genius. This thing didn't expect me to climb out a window. Maybe it was so rigid in its rules and regulations that it couldn't fathom the window being used as an exit. It couldn't imagine what it would be like to break rules. Using a bedsheet, I leaned out. I was having second thoughts. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't tell why. Was I dying, or just deathly nervous? I felt around with the sole of my left foot, trying to find a grip. But no, the exterior was a smooth red. There was nothing to grab. Instead, I settled on dangling out the window, clinging to that bedsheet for dear life. At some point, my hand slipped. I fell and smacked the corner of an arched window, sending me into a roll. I hit the ground at an angle, bruising 2 ribs and knocking my shoulder out of its socket. But I was alive, screaming but alive. I could hear the crackling of the PA system from the house as a furious scream curled over the airways. I could see the lights of my apartment go on and off. I heard glass and wood break as something tore through it. People were gathering on the street, thinking there'd been a brawl, that I'd been thrown out of a window. Someone was filming, another was calling for help. As they carried me away, I saw the shadow of an old man linger in the open window, and on the floor below was Yafo, raising a lit cigarette at me. Other tenants joined him from their own windows, looking out at me with pity, shaking their heads, shedding a few tears. They weren't angry, they were mourning. And in a flurry of emergency services, pain, and raised voices, the house of rest disappeared from my sight. I haven't been back since. I never knew who to talk to. Everyone who I thought would listen had nothing to say. I learned quickly after talking to my family that my story sounds mad. I've tried to soften it, to say that the landlord was abusive, but they couldn't make sense of it. "Then why did you stay so long?" they'd ask. "And wasn't he just an old man?" You have to look at it for what it really is. You have to hear and believe the full story. That's why I wanted to talk to you here, one of few places where I think a voice can be really heard. But I'm not going back, and I never will. The bruise on my chest has long since turned into little black strings. Most of the time it just looks like roots, but it flares up sometimes. When it does, the surrounding skin gets this mild tint of blue, like the image of a strange sunflower. I can also kind of see it in the cold. It's like it's always there, waiting just under the skin. Not too long ago, I reconnected with my lost love in Europe. I think she might have been what kept me from being complacent in the house of rest, and I'm so grateful for it. Without her, I wouldn't have seen the cage for what it was. She says she misses me too, and in a couple of weeks, I'll be going abroad to be with her again. But I wanted to share this story before I go. I wanted to talk openly about it this one last time, and then never again. Because even now, I can't help but think I might have made a mistake. That I might have turned away something that could have been perfect. That if I'd only stuck to the rules and kept my head down, maybe everything would have worked out. But then I get that ache in my chest, and I can't tell what it is. It might be the threat of something vast and inhuman claiming me as its own. Or it might be a heart that I willingly give. Either way, I know that I will never return to the house of rest. Not as I am, nor as I will be.